guys, welcome back. And today we're talking about Chapter 6, and this is going to deal with the history and government of the United States. So make sure as you are reading through the chapter and as you're taking notes here that you catch some of these important ideas. I'm just going to summarize some of them for you. So get something to write with, and let's get into chapter number 6. So we begin with the United States. As we look back in its history and how the United States was formed, we have to go back to the first settlers. And there were really three nations that were involved in settling the United States. First of all were the Spanish. They were the ones that came initially searching for gold, and they established the very first permanent European settlement in St. Augustine, Florida. And that is the oldest city that still exists in the United States today. Now, the English came, and they're probably best known for settling the United States because many of them stayed. And this, compared to the Spanish, who they kind of came and they left, and when they didn't find gold, they were not really interested in staying long term. We have the others who did come for long term, like the English, and they settled along the East Coast, establishing Jamestown, Virginia, as their first permanent settlement along that East Coast. Now, the French, they came, but they settled a little farther north, and they came primarily for trading and for trapping and hunting and that type. Now, as those settlers came to the Americas, there was something known as the Columbian Exchange, which we have ideas that are coming over from Europe into the North American territories, and we also have new goods and products that can go back to Europe, and this became known as that Columbian Exchange. It was a circular flow. There were some negative things that came with that: disease, killing Indians, taking Indian land, all kinds of stuff that happened with that was negative. But there were some positive things that came out of that as well, especially things that went back to Europe. And you could argue that there weren't a whole lot of positive things that came over from Europe other than the advancement in technology and the new people groups. So as the United States began to form, they had to establish a new country as the British colonies had set up the people to live over in North America. They were originally supposed to be loyal to the British government, but as we all know, that didn't last too long. As the British began to oppress the colonists and they didn't really like the way the government was working, they eventually revolted, and we know that to be the Revolutionary War that helped to found the United States of America. And this is more of a U.S. history topic, but we could debate whether the Revolutionary War was acceptable, whether it was right, and that's something for another time. Now, as we progress a little bit further on in American history, we know that the United States was very small to begin with, and it expanded. And one of the biggest expansions was in 1803, the Louisiana Purchase, and that was under the presidency of Thomas Jefferson. And they purchased that from France, and it expanded the size of the United States and more than doubled it. And we got that for a steal of a deal at only 3 cents an acre. 3 cents an acre. Now, as the United States begins to grow, how people began to move westward, and there are people who are no longer content to be on the eastern side of the Mississippi. They start moving westward, and they move via the Oregon Trail, and that became the main highway to get out to the western part of the United States. In order to make room for all these new settlers that were coming westward, we started moving Native Americans all around. We first of all moved them out of the southeast, and we told them, hey, go to the western part of the United States, Oklahoma, Texas, Kansas, and those areas. And then pretty soon we said, oh, wait, sorry, we need that land. We're going to move you up north. And then we kept moving them all over the place. And we really didn't take a lot into consideration when it came to the Native American people. And this area out west, as the settlers began to travel out west, is known as the frontier. It is the free and open land that is now being settled by ranchers and farmers, and they are taking that under their control and trying to make that something that will help turn a profit. As we move forward, the United States begins to industrialize and urbanize. And it's important that you understand the ideas of both of those terms. Industrialization is where we're going to build factories and change our economy from farming into machines. And we're going to start building all these factories and mechanize all of the processes of producing rather than focusing just on agriculture. Urbanization is a movement to the cities, and a lot of people were going away from living out in the middle of nowhere, out in the middle of the country, and gravitating toward the cities, and we call that urbanization. And as that happens, there are a lot of people that are coming into the United States from other countries, and we call that immigration. And these immigrants began to pour into the cities, especially along the east and the west coast, looking for jobs. And oftentimes, factory workers were looking for lower cost employees, and these immigrants fit that very well. So cities begin to grow very fast, and factories hire these employees that are willing to work for less, which in some ways starts to deteriorate the cities because people can't afford to upkeep their apartments, they can't afford to do improvements to the buildings that are already there. And so that does cause a few problems. Now, the United States continues to grow, and they grow to become a world power. And as we look beyond the borders of the United States, traditionally the United States has remained independent due to the amount of natural resources that it has. We are usually not having to go to other countries to gain some of the natural resources we need to produce our economic goods. We have enough here. We have enough lumber. We have a lot of coal. We have a lot of petroleum. And so we're not forced to go beg from other countries to get that. We're also protected by oceans on both sides. And so for another country to come in and to attack, it does require a substantial navy to do so. Now, when it comes to global affairs, the United States has traditionally been neutral. We have remained mostly unharmed. I know 9/11 kind of throws a wrench in that, as well as Pearl Harbor. But for the most part, considering our history, we have very rarely been touched by anybody else due to the fact that we've remained neutral in a lot of efforts, a lot of global problems. Now, World War I and World War II were the exception of that, and we become increasingly more involved in things as time goes on. Now let's talk about social change for just a little bit. In the early 20th century, the United States saw perhaps one of the greatest social changes, maybe I shouldn't say greatest, more significant social changes in its history. As we see the invention of the automobile, the airplane, we start to see the Roaring Twenties build up, where we have movies and we have a nightlife, all kinds of stuff that's going on. We see a lot of social change there. And a lot of people began to move to the suburbs. As I talked about a moment ago, there are people who are living in the cities that can't afford to keep it up and to invest money into those cities. And so there are those that don't like that, and they start moving out away from the inner cities to the suburbs. The 1960s and 1970s showed a lot of social unrest in the United States. A lot of controversy over some social issues like civil rights, women's rights, the unsuccessful war in Vietnam, and people began to protest and voice their opinions a little bit more than what they would have in previous generations. It's also during this time that the United States becomes the world's leading economic superpower. So as we begin to talk about the United States government, we are a representative democracy, and that's where we elect people to represent us out in the government realm. And so we're going to elect officials to take our place and to vote on our behalf. And so we don't have to vote on every little detail. We let those representatives take care of that. Now, there are three branches to the American government. The first one is the executive branch. That's the president, and he is the person who is supposed to enforce our laws. The second branch is the legislative branch. Now, that is our Congress, made up of the House of Representatives and the Senate. And they are those who are going to make the laws. Then our third branch is the judicial branch. And that's the court system, most notably the Supreme Court. And their job is to interpret the laws. So make sure you catch all three of those and their job and their responsibility.